Okay, so could you introduce yourself to us, please?
Sure. Okay. I'm Stuart Reichler. I'm a senior lecturer here at the University of Texas at Austin. I teach a class called Scientific Inquiry Across the Disciplines. That's part of the FRI program. And I also do research in Waller Creek, looking at water quality in Waller Creek.
Thank you very much. So what we wanted to ask you is basically your educational background, and we wanted to ask about where the interest for plants stem from and why you opted for a botany, like specifically botany for a PhD program.
So it's all a little weird. All of my post-high school education has been here at UT. So I did my undergraduate here, and I came to UT, so I mostly grew up in Dallas, and more or less there were two choices. You could go to UT Austin or you could go to Texas A&M. Obviously there were other places to go. That's where most of the students in my high school went, and I knew I didn't want to go to Texas A&M. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have been there. It's kind of a hick town, and it was a lot worse back then. It was a lot worse, a much smaller town. So whatever, I wanted to come to Austin, I wanted to come to UT. I was doing my bachelor's degree. I knew I liked science, I liked biology, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. A mate of mine in the dorm, so we were also in a class together, he'd gotten a job working for a professor. And actually the professor we were taking a class from. And I asked him how he got the job. He told me that he'd gone to ask the professor. And I thought to myself, I could probably do that. I could probably go ask somebody if I can work in their lab. And naively, I more or less just assumed that the professor he was working with, like at most each professor could have like a single undergraduate in their lab. So I didn't go talk to that professor. I went to talk to some other professors, and they kept basically telling me no, but they would always sort of give me somebody else to go talk to. And at the time, because I was 19 and like a go-getter, actually that's a lie, I really wasn't much of a go-getter, because I was 19 and enthusiastic about working in a lab, I took their no's, but every time they would say, why don't you go talk to this person, I'd be like, okay, I should go talk to that person, that makes sense. I think, now looking at it later in retrospect, I think they're just trying to get rid of me. And so I think, because most professors are generally, well, mostly nice people, I think they just want to be like, no, go away. They'd be like, no, but why don't you check with this other person? So I eventually got to this guy named Stan Rue, who at the time was the chairman of the botany department. And I didn't really care much about plants or animals or whatever, I just wanted to work in a lab. And so I talked to him a little bit, and he asked me how I was doing in the biology class I was currently taking. And it was good because at the time I was making an A, but I didn't do very well in the final. I ended up getting a B in the class. But at the time I was making an A, and he thought that was pretty good. And so he offered to have me come back, this is in the spring semester, and come back in the fall, fall of my sophomore year, and start working in his lab. So I showed up in the fall, and I started working in the lab, which is this same lab as it were that we're sitting in now, and I really liked it. This is the office, but in the lab part of the lab. Oh. I worked with a graduate student, and I worked on some cool projects, and I really liked it. And so, and I found plants really interesting to work on. But as an undergraduate, I didn't take a single class about plants. So on my undergrad degree is a Bachelor of Arts in Biology. And one of the reasons I chose that degree plan, there are two. One is it didn't require calculus. And the other one was that I could choose most of the upper division classes I could take. So it wasn't like really strict about you have to take this class and this class and this class, which was cool because I could take classes I was interested in. But it required, back then there were basically 3 departments in biology. There was zoology, botany, and microbiology. And I had to have one class in each of those. And so for my botany class, I ended up taking this basically molecular biology class that was taught by a botany professor, so it counted as a botany class. But we didn't really do anything with plants. I guess I didn't know I liked plants back then. I didn't take any classes as an undergraduate, but that's what I was doing research in. And when I decided to come back for my PhD, I I really like working in this lab, so I came back here and I did my PhD in plant biology. And I mean, as I did more of it, I got to appreciate plants more. It's a little bit weird because oftentimes when you tell other scientists that you work in plants, they look at you weird. Part of it is it's much harder to get money for plant research than it is for cancer, but there's lots of money for cancer research and stuff like that. So lots of people want to do research in areas where there's lots of funding, so they can get funding and keep their labs running and whatever. But I really like working in plants, so that's what I did for a while.
Thank you. So it says in your resume that you've done a postdoctoral fellow abroad. And can you kind of expound on this, on what the biggest difference was, like as compared to other postdoctoral fellows in America?
It started because in the summer of '96, I took a motorcycle trip with some friends to Mexico. Not everybody, lots of people told us we'd never survive, which we did. We had an amazing time. It was, this might be a little weird to say, but it was probably the most exciting, coolest trip I'll ever take in my entire life. Because I had no idea what I was getting myself into, right? I went with actually 5 friends. One of them spoke Spanish. The rest of us didn't. We got separated from one of our friends at the border because we didn't have the right paperwork to get his motorcycle across the border. So it ended up being 3 of us who did this trip, and it was incredible. And one of the first nights we were in Mexico, the hotel we stayed at was next to, near a university. And we were watching the students like walk back and forth to their classes. And we started talking about how it'd be cool to finish our PhDs and go get a job somewhere else. And so when it was getting close to finishing my PhD in 1999, I started thinking, well, if I'm going to go do something, work in another country or whatever, I should do that now, right? I mean, we talked about in class, the typical thing is you do your PhD, and maybe you work in industry, or if you want to stay in academics, you do a postdoc and whatever, and try to use that to build up your resume and maybe get an academic job somewhere. But I decided, not that working outside the United States is bad, but it's a little bit unusual. I decided I really wanted to do it. I wasn't married, didn't have any kids that I know about, and so I decided I'd start to look for a job in Mexico. And basically through somebody I knew, I was talking to one of the professors here in the botany department, and it was getting close to finishing my PhD. And they said, what are you going to do after your PhD? I said, well, I want to go work in Mexico. And he said, oh, this professor I used to work with, they're in Mexico. Why don't you contact them and see what happens? And I did. I emailed this woman, professor, and she basically emailed me back and said, like, when can you start? Which was weird. So I was like, it's a bad analogy, but it's kind of like when you go on a date with somebody and like it's moving too fast, and you're like, whoa, we should take it a little bit slower? Yeah. Maybe late to the second or third date, but whatever. So this was like maybe in October, so like Thanksgiving was coming up. So I asked if I could come visit over Thanksgiving break. So I flew down there for Thanksgiving and visited the lab because they don't celebrate Thanksgiving in Mexico, so it's just a regular work week for them. And the lab was really cool. The people were really awesome. I'd never been to the town, which is Cuernavaca, which is where the lab was, which is beautiful. And so I was pretty fired up. And so January of 2000, I hopped on my motorcycle and I drove to Mexico, and I lived there and worked there for a year. It was totally amazing. So your real question was, what's different? The answer is not much. The lab I worked in there actually was much nicer, so it wasn't in a building that's falling apart like this building is. It was in a really nice new building, relatively new. They had all the same modern equipment. It was a very well-funded lab. They had all the cool, all the nice equipment that we do here. And scientists, I mean, in some ways it's kind of cool about doing science is that in many ways it's international, right? If you're a plant biologist and you're doing plant biology in the United States, the people who are doing it in Mexico and Uganda and everywhere else are basically doing the same things. It was really a wonderful experience to work with other scientists in another country and live there and be there, right? Not as just a tourist, but as somebody who actually was living there and like had to figure out how to get my laundry done and where to go to get my hair cut, all those other kinds of day-to-day things that you normally don't think about, especially when I first got there and didn't speak the language very much. I eventually learned Spanish, but at the beginning I didn't know much Spanish. It was a bit of a struggle. But it was cool, and everybody should go abroad something, do work somewhere, and go to school, whatever. It was a great experience.
Eventually immersion got to you.
Yeah. It was, I mean, the only really reason I came back is while I was working there doing research, I realized I really missed teaching. Because most of the time I was in school, graduate school, I was teaching and researching. And when I was there, I was just doing research, and I realized the thing I really missed wasn't research. I'm still doing research. The thing I really missed was teaching when I wasn't doing it. I contacted some people back here at UT and found out there was a teaching position available, and so I decided I should sort of jump on that while I still could, instead of staying in Mexico and continue to do research there, and maybe I could get a teaching job later or not. I decided to jump and come back after a year to the teaching position that was here at UT, which is more or less this job I still have.
That sort of kind of brings me up to my next question, which is, why did you ultimately decide with teaching, and why did you really go for it instead of keep researching and devoting the majority of your time there?
So, okay, the kind of short answer is research, as you found out a little bit, can be really frustrating. And oftentimes the payoff is weeks, months, and sometimes years down the road. And that's hard for me. This idea of doing something now and having it pay off months or whatever down the road is really hard for me. In some cases, especially in molecular biology, you're doing something, you're cloning a gene or something like that. It can take, days or weeks, and then sometimes you get to the end of the experiment and it fails. So you spent all this time working on it, and then it doesn't work out. And then you gotta redo it again. For me, it was a little hard to have that payoff like sort of off in the future, and the frustration of the sort of, to be honest, constant failure. And maybe that sounds bad, but if you talk to most researchers, what happens most of the time is things fail. It's a little bit like being a baseball player, right? If your batting average is like 250, like if 1 out of 4 experiments works as a researcher, that's pretty damn good. If you can get up to like a third or even half of your experiments working, like that's amazing. Most of the time you're failing. It was hard for me. And I like teaching. I enjoy working with students. I enjoy interacting with students. Students crack me up a lot. You guys are very funny. The sort of rewards are much more direct. Last week, after class, one of the students was a little bit upset because we've been talking about careers in class, and she's more or less been forced into a major by her parents that she doesn't really want to be in, right? And we were talking about careers, and that kind of brought up some emotions for her because she was a little bit upset about sort of, she wants to do this one thing, but her parents are putting a lot of pressure on her to do something else. So after class, we were able to talk about it, and I don't think I solved all of her life problems. Maybe I solved none of them, but it's really rewarding to interact with students on that level and be able to talk to them and give them some perspective and stuff like that. And then, even if a class really sucks, which happens, in another few days you get to do it again and make it better, right? As opposed to having waited weeks or months to find out the answer and whatever. You go in, you think, oh my God, this class is horrible, I'm doing a horrible job. The next day or a few days later, you get to kind of make it better and improve things. So that's kind of the short answer of why I really enjoy teaching as opposed to doing research. I do enjoy doing research, but maybe not as a full-time job. So I still do research now, but it's just more of a part-time thing instead of a full-time thing.
Going back a bit more into like the laboratory setting, what was one of the most interesting things you've worked with? Or, uncanny or unthought of?
In some ways, the most interesting research that I've done is the stuff I'm doing now. Last summer, I started a project with Dr. Ruth Scheer, who's in chemistry, and a couple other people, another guy named Tim Rydell. Some of them were already working on issues of water quality in Waller Creek. So, I'm assuming you guys have at least seen Waller Creek or been near it at some point. It looks like a very nice place, and it is in some ways, but the water's pretty heavily contaminated with fecal bacteria. And we know the bacteria there, it's relatively easy to to quantify how many bacteria are in the water. What's trickier is to figure out where they're coming from and why they're there. But it's considered one of the most, maybe the second most degraded creek in the city of Austin. And so it's been really cool to get involved in working on water quality issues in the creek. And so some of the things that we've done has been kind of cool. We've looked at the level of antibiotic resistant bacteria in the creek. We've actually found pretty consistently like 10 or 20% of the bacteria, of the E. coli bacteria, the ones that come out of our feces, that they're resistant to some antibiotics. We haven't tested every antibiotic on the planet yet. We've tested some, and we found out that a pretty high percentage of them are resistant to some of those antibiotics. It may not be surprising because some of the fecal bacteria are probably coming from people, either, as I like to call it, direct deposit, usually homeless people using the creek as a bathroom, or through leakage of sewer pipes. So that's been kind of cool. We've also just been able to try to pinpoint the areas where we think are the sort of highest concentrations, to try to figure out where problems are occurring so we can maybe try to solve some of those problems.
And
So,
would you say that's a bit more of a trial and error, just as you described research would be? Or like how far in the future are you looking at this project and being resolved?
so we're actually just got some funding to try to really pinpoint the areas along. So Water Creek, one of the good things about it from a research standpoint, it's not very big. It's like 6 miles long from Town Lake to here in sort of north central Austin where it starts. And so we've got some funding to try to, this summer we hope, to pinpoint the areas with the highest concentrations of these bacteria. So maybe some of the sources of where the bacteria are entering the creek. And then we're going to try to use some molecular biology to figure out, interestingly, or maybe weirdly enough, you can identify through their DNA E. coli from different animals, right? So if you think, like humans and dogs, which are some of the two biggest culprits as far as like urban creeks go, we've had a long evolutionary time apart. And so the E. coli in humans is different than the E. coli in dogs, genetically different. And so we can use those differences to identify this is dog E. coli or this is human E. coli. So we're going to be looking at dogs and human, and I think probably raccoon and maybe bats. There's a few places downtown where there's some bridges where bats live underneath them, and that's right over the creek. So we're going to try to identify the organisms that are depositing, as it were, the E. coli into the creek and try to find out where the highest concentrations of these are, so we can try to start to work for some solutions. So we can try to lower the E. coli levels in the creek and make it a place that people can actually go. You can go hang out in the creek now, but like, don't get in it.
Don't get it.
Yeah.
Maybe set
Definitely
some
don't
legal
drink it.
restrictions to homeless people or redirect organisms.
Yeah.
Or what
I mean,
solutions, what legalities? would
So
tie
I mean,
that?
one thing is it could be people walking their dogs and not cleaning up after their dogs,
Okay.
right? And there's other creeks in Austin that have had some of those problems, and they've been able to I don't know, solve it, but certainly lessen the impact. So maybe, I mean, it's tricky when you're trying to educate the public and encourage people to do the right thing. There are most of the kind of green spaces along Waller Creek already have the little bags where you can clean up after your dog. But maybe we need more of those. Maybe they need to be put closer together so people don't have to go so far. Maybe some enforcement. There are also homeless people who live along the creek in different parts of Waller Creek as well. So it may be that it's homeless people who are causing some of the problems. Sewer leaks are a little trickier because they're expensive to fix. So we're going to try some of that. To be honest, is sort of the city's issue to try to fix. But we're going to try to figure out at least where and what are the most serious problems. And it may take a few years to try to solve some of those problems, but you can't solve it if we don't know what the problems are in the first place. So we're going to try to figure that out this summer if we can. We'll see how it goes.
Thank you for explaining what your current research is. what advice would you give students, both graduate and undergraduate, about balancing personal life and educational life?
It's hard. Most of the time people feel really lost in work or in their personal life is because they don't really know what they want. Right? It's like, being physically lost in space. You're going somewhere, you don't know where you're going, you don't know how to get there. I know which doesn't happen anymore because everybody just follows our phones to wherever we need to go. Right? It'd be like finding my office today. Right? You're not really sure where it is, and the door says like "Do not open." Right?
Yeah.
Like, do I go through this door? Do I not go through this door?
There's a second space.
Yeah, it's a little tricky, right? And so that tends to make people anxious. Even though, a little bit like research, more often than not, our personal and our professional goals often don't turn out the way we envision them at the beginning. Not having a goal at all is really disorienting. Spending some time trying to figure out really what are the things you would like to be doing, and who you want to do those things with, and where you want to do those things. Even though it may not turn out that way, having some idea of how and where you want to do it can make the journey a lot easier, because at least you have some vague idea of what you want to do, right? And the steps you need to take to try to get there. So when I was finishing my PhD, or I guess better, my undergraduate degree, I grew up, like I said, mostly in Dallas. It seemed like a totally fine place, I don't know where y'all are from, but when I got to Austin, I was like, Dallas is a shithole. Like, I can't believe my parents made me grow up here. There's nothing to do, and it's all money and status, and it's really weird. But then get to Austin, and it's like a much more chilled out place, and there's actually like things to do and places to go, and trees. When I was finishing my undergraduate, I really wanted to stay in Austin. I didn't want to go anywhere else. And so that colored a lot of my decisions. In part, colored my decision. I was out of school for about 2 years, a little less than 2 years, did undergraduate, graduate school. And so, wanting to stay in Austin, I really only looked for jobs here in Austin after I graduated. In fact, for a little while, for like 6 months or so, during that period, I worked at Academy Sporting Goods, because I had a science job for a little while. I got fired from my science job, so I needed a job, and I worked at Academy for a while I was applying for graduate school. And then I knew I got into graduate school, and working at Academy didn't seem like such a bad thing, because I knew eventually I was going to grad school. And I got a discount on all my sporting goods stuff. So that kind of colored what I wanted to do and helped me make some decisions about where and who and all that other kind of thing. Like I said, when I was finishing my PhD, since I didn't have a spouse and I didn't have a child and stuff like that, it made it easier for me to make some of these decisions about going to work kind of anywhere outside of the United States. But I also thought about at that time, hopefully, eventually I will have a spouse and I will have a kid and stuff like that. And so I felt like if I do this now, maybe I won't have an opportunity to do it later, or it'll be more difficult to do it later, right? So thinking about having just saying goals seems weird, because I think people tend to get really goal-oriented, right? I don't know how many or if any of y'all are pre-meds, right? But pre-meds are really infamous for this. I have to be a medical doctor. And if I'm not going to be a medical doctor, my life is over as I know it. And they get sort of insanely focused on it, which, if you want to go to medical school, it's really competitive and it's hard. You do have to be focused, right? But the flip side is, there are lots of people who wanted to go to medical school and didn't, and have incredibly happy, fulfilled, wonderful lives. Right? So having goals are good, but thinking about what you want to do to get there, but remembering that there's both career and personal life, and if things aren't in balance, right? If you only do one and not the other, it can get tricky. All career, no personal life, that's not much good. And then all personal life, no career, that can be a little tricky unless you're win the lottery or super wealthy.
Thank you.